Friday the 13th launched with enormous promise, but became notorious for bugs and technical issues before the infamous lawsuit ultimately killed the game. Predator Hunting Grounds struggled to maintain momentum after launching on PS4 and the Epic Game Store, essentially cutting it off at the kneecaps before it could even get out of the gate. Ghostbusters signed that same death warrant when it too was an Epic Games exclusive. Texas Chainsaw Massacre faced criticism over matchmaking, slow development, and frustrating monetization, and Killer Klowns' audience evaporated within months. Now, Gun and IllFonic are teaming up again for Halloween. Should horror fans be excited, or is Halloween the game already in trouble? Halloween the game is launching on September 8th, 2026. On paper, it's a horror fan's ultimate dream. Gun and IllFonic are joining forces again after 2017's Friday the 13th the game to bring Michael Myers back to life in an asymmetrical 1v4 format. But if you've been paying attention to the multiplayer horror genre since 2017, you're probably asking the same terrifying question that I am. Is this game already dead on arrival? It seems like Gun and IllFonic make games that horror fans desperately want to love, but they repeatedly struggle with long-term execution. And now, in the year of our Lord, 2026, has anything actually changed? Let's go back to where it all started. Friday the 13th, the game. It had unmatched passion, but it died a slow death. Yes, the legal lawsuit over the IP cut its life short, but the game was already drowning in bugs, exploits, balancing issues, toxicity, but what game isn't, and player retention. Personally, I love this game. I backed it on Kickstarter and I bought multiple copies on Xbox and PlayStation for my friends so we could all play together. One of the last all-nighters I pulled before becoming a parent was playing Friday the 13th with my friends. It was good times. Since that breakup, both companies have gone on to other projects, but examining these projects reveals a concerning pattern. Predator Hunting Grounds was developed by IllFonic, originally published by Sony, and was, for some reason, exclusive to the PS4 and the Epic Game Store launcher on PC. Jesus, talk about shooting yourself in the fucking foot. What a joke of a release. And I think that alone might have killed the game. By forcing a multiplayer game to be console and Epic Games exclusive, they severed half of their potential community from the get-go. The Steam version came out a year later, and by the time IllFonic bought back the rights and finally put the game on Xbox in late 2024, it was too little too late. Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed, again developed by IllFonic, looked like it had a ton of love and care from the devs in terms of aesthetic and faithfulness to the series, but it failed to deliver enough content at launch, and suffered from repetitive gameplay, as well as the usual balance issues that plague all asymmetrical multiplayer games. Of course, all of that pales in comparison to the sin that was Epic Games exclusivity. Was Predator not enough of a lesson for them? Like, no, seriously, what the fuck? Published by Gun Interactive and developed by Sumo Digital, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game launched with some serious hype. Featuring an innovative 3v4 format, brand new canon killers co-created with the movie's actual writer, and the legendary Kane Hodder doing the mocap for Leatherface. Despite a successful launch boosted by its inclusion on Xbox Game Pass, the game's initial momentum ultimately collapsed. This downfall was driven by server instability, developer stubbornness, awful game balance, shameless monetization, and everyone's favorite, say it with me, player retention. The final nail in the coffin came less than 2 years after launching the game when Gun pulled the plug on any further development. Killer Klowns from Outer Space, the game, damn, these game titles are really creative, right? Released on June 4th, 2024. It was co-developed by IllFonic and TerraVision Games. It also featured a shift on the asymmetrical setup with 3-player controlled alien clowns versus 7 survivors. While critics gave it average to mixed reviews and Steam users rated it mostly positive, the title completely failed to retain a sustainable player base. Starting out with 4,300 players in June of 2024, that dwindled down to just double digits by the end of that same year. Fuck me, what a drop. When you look at all of these projects as a whole, you realize that we aren't looking at random bad luck. We're looking at a predictable, repeating lesson that Gun and IllFonic seem to refuse to learn from. They release these games at an accessible price point. Fans rush in, the initial hype is incredible, and the vibe is unmatched. But within weeks, sometimes days, the cracks begin to show. The launch content is shallow, the maps are limited, and the hardcore player base completely memorize the layouts. They figure out the exact exploits, the infinite loops, and the broken mechanics. Suddenly, the casual fans get absolutely demolished by coordinated teams of players min-maxing the game. The fun disappears, replaced by toxic, frustrating balance issues and game-breaking bugs that take weeks or even months to patch out. Casual players get frustrated and quit. The player counts collapse into a downward spiral, and once that bleeding starts, it's all she wrote. The community vanishes. Matchmaking queues take 15 minutes, and the developers eventually cut their losses, issue a corporate statement, and move on to the next IP. Rinse and repeat. Every single game produced by Gun and IllFonic since 2017 follows this exact heartbreaking life cycle that I've dubbed the Asymmetrical Horror Curse. Yes, very creative, I know. It's all incredibly depressing, but before I get into the things that have me dead scared for the future of Halloween the game, let's take a moment to focus on what Gun and IllFonic can do to finally break this curse. The biggest reason to be hopeful about this new project is that they're finally decoupling the game's survival from online multiplayer, it seems. The inclusion of a fully fleshed out, standalone single-player story mode at launch could potentially rewrite the script. If the multiplayer side of Halloween suffers from the exact same problems of the past, the game won't instantly become useless waste. You can still load it up on a Friday night, play through the story mode, and experience a highly atmospheric, cinematic story narrated by Dr. Loomis himself. This gives the game some permanent lasting value. By working together again, Gun and IllFonic can challenge their obsessive, unmatched passion for horror history like they did with Friday the 13th. Gun is a deeply hands-on boutique creative studio. They excel at obsessive fan service details. However, their focus on atmospheric perfection has left them ill-equipped to handle complex back-end code in the past. For Halloween, IllFonic is serving as the lead developer and the co-publisher. They now have had years of experience with multi-platform multiplayer shenanigans. Together, they should be able to make Halloween's debut look AAA in quality while also keeping ahead of any potential bugs on the back end. Additionally, to break the predictable speedrunning survivor meta, the developers officially confirmed that matches feature interactive civilian NPCs wandering the Haddonfield maps. Survivors must find them to warn them, while Michael hunts them down to gain strength. Having objectives that are random and moving in every match will force survivors out of the fixed map loop exploits. Thankfully, they are also bypassing platform gating with this release. Pre-orders and store pages are already active, confirming a synchronized Day 1 crossplay launch across PS5, Xbox Series X and S, Steam, and the Epic Game Store on September 8th, 2026. The launch day matchmaking pool will be at maximum capacity. This is great news as a whole, and will at least start out with some really good player numbers across all platforms. Lastly, the fatal flaw they need to avoid this time around is a rapid loss of players. Balancing issues are a naturally occurring problem for these types of games, and players will drop off, but there's a way to keep the dedicated players on board and coming back for more. IllFonic has demonstrated some prowess with customizable character builds and creative character cosmetics, while Gun has excelled in deep obsessive lore grind loops. Together, they can keep players dedicated to the game with some interesting skill trees, fun player builds, visually appealing cosmetic options, and unlockable historical lore, all tied to performance metrics, player engagement, or achievements. Having said all that, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little skeptical. The asymmetrical live service horror genre, while being incredibly specific, only has a few mainstays under its belt, and of those mainstays, only one has really succeeded. Dead by Daylight is the undisputed king of the genre. Launched by Behavior Interactive in 2016, it's completely eaten the market share of every competitor that has come and gone in its now 10-year existence. Personally, I have a love-hate relationship with Dead by Daylight, but that could be a whole separate video. With so many attempts into the market, horror fans have been abused and neglected left and right. Some of the more egregious culprits being Prop Night, VHS, Last Year, and Evil Dead. The asymmetrical aspect can be fun and exhilarating, but the live service multiplayer element constantly threatens to destroy that magic through a vicious cycle of developer mismanagement, and I'm having a really hard time seeing how Halloween is going to avoid this trap. Honestly, I would give my left testicle just to have a single-player, story-driven horror video game based on some of my favorite horror properties and be of actual high quality. I remember when games would come out and the main focus was a single-player experience with a tacked-on multiplayer mode that was fun for a little while but ultimately forgettable. Now, it's the exact opposite. When did that happen and why? I mean, I know why, money, but anyway, that's not what we're here for. I digress. Back to my point. Overall, Halloween doesn't need to be a masterpiece. It just needs to be fun, balanced enough, stable at launch, and have a manageable post-launch content rollout. If there are microtransactions or DLC, they need to remain affordable. No $10 skins and no single DLC characters. There shouldn't be a weirdly half-assed battle pass system either, like what's in Dead by Daylight right now. I'd also like to argue for a single player not needing to be online. No internet connection required. I'm looking at you, Evil Dead. Similar to what they did with Friday the 13th. But if we want to be realistically skeptical, we need to look at Gun and IllFonic's collective history over the last 10 years and assess the most likely outcome for failure. All of the structural changes that they're promising, like the single-player story mode, the day one crossplay, the dynamic civilian system, they all sound incredible on paper, but it's really going to come down to execution. For example, the single-player story could end up being very shallow if it's just a glorified tutorial for the multiplayer mode. If it's not a genuine, polished, and fully thought-out story that expands the lore of the original film, then it'll be criticized and forgotten within weeks of launch, if not sooner. Crossplay at launch could end up being a total disaster if the servers can't handle the traffic, or if players on PC are able to immediately break the game with hacks. The choice of providing 4-day early access for players who buy the deluxe version of the game could also prove disastrous. Having a full weekend of early access to the game before anyone else is a huge boon to anyone who's all in on the multiplayer, which could hurt player retention when casual fans boot up the game on September the 8th and they're immediately outplayed by the hardcore sweaties. The dynamic civilian system sounds like a surefire way to prevent those sweaties from taking full advantage of the early access, but what if the AI is easily manipulated or completely broken? The genre's history clearly shows that all of these problems are going to crop up. It's not just Gun or IllFonic, it's all developers who dabble into this space. Behavior themselves have had so many controversies and fires that they've had to put out or outright ignore over the last 10 years. Can Gun and IllFonic keep up this time around? Are they even willing to? I want this game to succeed because I love John Carpenter's Halloween, and I'm a huge horror movie nerd. But right now, their track record just doesn't show growth. It shows a blueprint for another face-palming disaster that we all should have seen coming from a mile away. I'll end the video with this. If you're excited for this game, I'm not trying to dissuade you or take that away from you. I'm excited too. I think of this more of as a PSA for anyone who may have been unaware of the developer's previous endeavors, or as a warning to my fellow horror movie nerds to curb your expectations. I will never try to tell anyone else how to spend their hard-earned cash. I'm only trying to inform and engage. I just don't want Halloween to fail, quite the opposite in fact. I would love to look like an idiot a year from now. I want Gun and IllFonic to prove every concern in this video wrong because when these studios get it right, they absolutely nail it. The problem has never been about passion, it's about execution, pun intended. Maybe this will finally be the game that breaks the curse. But after everything that's happened over the last decade, I think horror fans have earned the right to be a little skeptical. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one.